Hi, I'm Bruce Cantrell, and I'd like to welcome you to the biology seminar, Living and Working Under the Sea. Before we start talking about living and working under the sea and underwater habitats, you need to understand a little bit about what we call saturation diving, because it's saturation diving that actually depends how long and at what depth people can live and work under the sea. Saturation diving was a new concept, wasn't really investigated till the late 1950s, but before that we had some idea of what happens when you are under pressure at depth. The concept first came into play when we were building big bridges and tunneling under the water and under rivers to make highways and things like that. We would have to take a compartment down there to keep the water out so the employees could work, and they would overpressure the compartment. That would force the water out and it wouldn't leak in and drown everybody. They noticed, however, that people who had been working down in these pressurized compartments over periods of time, when they came out, they started having big problems. They would have joint problems, they would have numbness, some people would become paralyzed. A lot of people even died. At the time, the medical community referred to that as Caisson's disease, named after the big confined space that they were working in. A lot of research finally determined that Caisson's disease was nothing more than nitrogen under pressure being forced into the body, being forced into the tissue, into the blood. And if you came from a high pressure to a low pressure too fast without letting that nitrogen bleed off naturally, it would come out of solution and form gas bubbles in the blood system, which would travel through the blood system, get lodged against nerves, get lodged in joints, and some would even go into the heart or the brain, causing paralysis and death. Back in the 1950s, when people started seriously entering the water, nobody knew what the effects of this nitrogen would have on the body at different depths. So in the late 1950s, an individual, a Navy commander, Commander George Bond, developed what he called Project Genesis. What he did with Project Genesis was, in a laboratory environment, he would take a pressure chamber and he would take animals, put them in the pressure chamber, increase the pressure, simulating going under the water at different depths. As he would go from a high pressure to a low pressure, they would then observe the animals and try to figure out what was a safe speed at which to decompress these animals, that is, bring them back up to atmospheric pressure. Some of the animal subjects they used were goats, because apparently goats, believe it or not, have some of the same physiology in common with humans. In the early 1960s, Commander Bond and his staff had worked out a lot of the preliminary tables, that is, by using human volunteers, they would put them in pressure and then they would bring them back up to atmospheric pressure. Through trial and error, they worked up what they thought were some pretty safe schedules. Now, what is saturation diving? Saturation diving is the amount of nitrogen that gets forced into the blood and into the body. The amount of nitrogen that can be forced into the body is different at different depths, because at different depths you increase pressure. For instance, in diving, every 33 feet you've increased atmospheric pressure by 1. Say at the surface you're at 14.7 pounds, 1 atmospheric pressure. At 33 feet, you're at 2 atmospheres. At 66 feet, you're at 3, and so on and so on. A lot of the early experiments under the water kept their habitats above 33 feet. That way, even though you are saturated after 24 hours, that is, your body cannot hold any more nitrogen, in theory, whether you stay down 24 hours, 24 days, 24 years, it still takes the same amount of time for that nitrogen to come out of your body. If you stay above 33 feet, you still have to decompress, but the neat thing about it is you can actually decompress at the surface. So when I live in the habitat for 24 hours, even though I'm saturated for that depth, I can come to the surface to decompress. Think of decompression as a 2-liter bottle of soda. If you have a 2-liter bottle of soda, in order to have it carbonated, they forced carbon into the solution. If I bring the 2-liter bottle in and I open the cap very, very slowly, that carbon is just going to fizz off naturally. But if I bring the bottle in the room and I drop it and it rolls across the floor and I get mad at it and kick it and I shake it up and sit it on the table, open it very fast, that carbon dioxide is going to want to come out of solution very, very quickly, and you're going to have soda going everywhere. The same thing happens with the body. You have to let the nitrogen bleed off slowly. If you don't let it bleed off slowly, if you bleed off too fast, it's going to be like the soda bottle. So I tell my students when I take them on a saturation dive, when you come up, don't shake up the soda bottle. You have to understand the saturation in order to understand the efforts that were made in the 1960s and 1970s to actually live and work under the ocean.